Welcome to I Do Podcast, guys.
Hello out there in the podcast world sphere.
Thank you for joining us.
Welcome to the show. We have a great show for you today, but first I want to talk a little bit about, we've mentioned it before, but our Hood River Oregon couples retreat, and we're really excited about it. We spent a few summers in Hood River and absolutely love the place. And it is just stunningly beautiful. There's so much to do outside, and we have a great program planned for the couples that attend. And the whole idea is to strengthen your relationship through trying new and exciting things. It's one of the top ways to improve your relationship. All of our experts, guests on the show talk about trying new things, having new experiences together. And we just think Hood River is the perfect place to offer this. So we will be going stand-up paddling, whitewater river rafting,
Waterfall hikes,
wine tasting. It's just a beautiful place. You can check it out on idopodcast.com and see some pictures from Hood River, or you can just, and you'll find out about the retreat and the details, or just Google Hood River, Oregon, and you're going to be amazed. It's like this secret little wonderland. I just love it. We first went there maybe like 7 years ago. And like I said, I've spent a few summers there, and yeah, we're really excited about it.
Yeah, I think for me, we're going to be doing some of the activities that we've never tried before. Like we haven't gone, rafting on the white salmon. I know you've paddled it, but we haven't done that. And so that's going to be really cool. So we're going to be doing a lot of experiences for the first time as well. So that's why we're super excited that we can do this retreat along with you. So,
and to meet you guys in person, we get all these great messages and emails. And so it'd be awesome to meet some of you guys in person.
Yeah. And I mean, we've had people ask us, like, where do you need to be in your relationship to enjoy this trip? And it's really, it can be for everybody. You can be struggling and you can be doing this to want to build some connection, or you can be doing amazing in your relationship and just wanting to try something new or go to a new place and then be able to work on your relationship as well. So it really can be for a broad spectrum of relationships. And like Chase mentioned, all the information is on our website at idopodcast.com. At the top, it says retreats. And when you click on that, it will take you to the retreats information. And the dates are July 28th through August 2nd. So we're getting close. So, send us any questions, any information, and we're happy to help.
Yeah, check that out. And you can also sign up to our newsletter list and join the 14-day Happy Couples Challenge. How many people have gone through it?
Close to, I want to say like 2,500 people, over 2,000 people have done this 14-day challenge. And the feedback that we've gotten from you guys is pretty amazing. So what it is we send you a daily email with a challenge to do. Most of them are pretty easy. Sometimes
challenge
they're challenging.
Sounds intimidating. It's like a activity.
Yeah, it is.
Homework.
Exactly. Homework for your relationship. So we've had, great feedback, and we're so happy that it's helping so many of you. So check that out as well. That's on our website at idopodcast.com.
And on today's show, we have a great topic that we haven't discussed in over 150 episodes, and that is financial planning within the marriage, but more specifically, prenups and postnups and some legal jargon in there. I found out that we don't have a prenup, which was news to me.
I'm sure you'll hear that shocking in the interview.
Yeah, you'll hear it live. And we welcome Alyssa Rauer, and Alyssa is a founding partner of Rauer LLC and has been practicing law in New York City since 2005 and matrimonial and family law exclusively since 2008. So she is definitely an expert on this field, and we kind of debunk a lot of myths and things that I thought about prenups and got some more information, and now things are much clearer, including the fact that we don't have one. But
I still laugh thinking about that.
Yeah.
Looking at your face when you said that was priceless.
It was good. But and we talk about other legal things to consider for your relationship, like living wills, power of attorney, some things that are really important, and we talk about it in a way that's not completely going to put you to sleep, because it can be a bit tedious, but we don't get bogged down in too much legal stuff, and it's really just informative. So definitely a valuable episode to listen to and educate yourself and see what you need to do to make the right financial decisions and legal decisions for your relationship.
Yeah. And as always, we appreciate you guys for listening to the show and for sending us your feedback and emails and those reviews that you send us. We appreciate it. 5-star reviews as Chase is putting his hand up. And enjoy today's episode. Today's show is brought to you by our Hood River Couples Retreat. Join us in Hood River, Oregon this summer, July 28th through August 2nd. The retreat is built to be the ultimate vacation for couples looking to have fun, try new things, and build a stronger relationship in paradise. We'll be doing activities like waterfall hikes, rafting, wine tastings, and so much more. For more information, visit our website at idopodcast.com/hoodriver. Hi, Alyssa. Thanks so much for joining us on the show today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Alyssa, we've given our listeners a little overview, so why don't you take a minute and tell us why you enjoy helping people improve their finances, which in turn is going to improve their relationship?
Sure, happy to. I think, helping people go into a marriage with their eyes wide open, I believe, strengthens a relationship and prevents them from coming in for a divorce down the road. Obviously, what couples fight about, one of the things that couples fight about most frequently is money. And if you go into a relationship without understanding what your partner has and how you plan to treat money during marriage, both spending and saving, it can cause a lot of discord later. So I do a lot of prenuptial agreements for couples, and thankfully, so far, knock on wood, none of the couples I've helped with a prenup have come back to seek divorce advice. So obviously there's no causation there, but I do think that having transparency into these issues can actually help when you have bumps down the road.
So we're certainly going to talk about prenups, and I have a lot of questions because honestly, I know we have one, but I have no idea what's in it or what it involves or the, do we have a prenup?
No,
Seriously?
we don't have a prenup.
See? That shows,
what are you talking about?
That shows how much see, this is good. Now we're going to find out. So this is perfect. That's why we had you on. So what is involved in a prenup, and how can we start to talk about it in our relationship?
So a prenup is an agreement that a couple enters into before they are married that can dictate what happens if they're upon a divorce or upon death, because that's obviously the two ways that your marriage is going to end, upon death or divorce. And we hope that it's upon death, which seems very morbid, but the alternative is worse. And what a prenup can do is it can modify or supersede a state's existing law. So what that means is that, for example, in New York, the law is that whatever you acquire during the marriage is marital property, with the exception of a few categories like inheritances or gifts from just to one person or personal injury proceeds. So you and your partner might decide that either you want to follow that law, in which case you could do a prenup that basically codifies the existing law. And the reason you might want to do that, for example, is if you change states, then you know what's going to happen if you were to get divorced, because the law that dictates upon a divorce is where you've been living leading up to the divorce. So, for example, if you move to Connecticut, in New York, what you come into the marriage with is your separate property. If you move, 30 miles and live in Greenwich, Connecticut, everything you have, whether it's premarital assets whether it's an inheritance, is part of the marital estate. So one reason people might get a prenup is to kind of lock in New York law. Or a couple might decide to deviate from New York law, which is another reason to get a prenuptial agreement. Did that answer your question?
Yes, the beginning stages, but this is all.
Sorry, no. A bit of a tangent. But
this is perfect. So I guess we don't. If we don't have a prenup and we're going by state laws, what do most states require of a couple? Let's say we don't want to think about it and we don't go into a marriage with the idea, but if there is a divorce, what usually happens? I know it varies on state, but what does your home state say?
Sure. So good question, Chase. And many, many couples out there don't have a prenup. And I think for your listeners, that's not a reason to go out and get what's called a postnup necessarily, which is basically the same thing as a prenup. It's just a document you sign after you get married, while you're already married. And lots of couples do that as well. They're not as common as prenups. But even if you say, you know what, a prenup is not for me, a postnup is not for me, there are certain ways that you can educate yourself so that if God forbid, your marriage breaks down, that you're prepared. And this is not at all, I'm certainly not advocating any divorce planning or anything devious or nefarious at all. What I'm advocating is that if you don't have an agreement, that you understand the basics of your state's laws so that every major decision you make during your marriage, you're going in with it with your eyes wide open. So as I said before, the laws of every state differ. I practice in New York, so that's where my knowledge is. And I think, as I said before, New York honors as separate property inheritances, your premarital property, or gifts that you get during your marriage. So one thing that I think it's important to understand is, so that in case you were to get divorced, is that if you get an inheritance, let's say during your marriage, and you want to keep it your separate property so that it's only yours if you were to get divorced, then you need to understand and have knowledge of the fact that you need to then put that inheritance in an account in your sole name and not commingle it with marital money. And commingling is when, let's say, I have an account with $100,000 that I inherited from my grandmother. I then take earnings during the marriage and I put it into that account. And then I use some of the money from that account to pay expenses. And then I put some more of my earnings into that account. I've now commingled that account. So it's important for people to understand just the basics so that they can make sound financial decisions during their marriage, even if they don't have a prenuptial or a postnuptial agreement.
So what about our listeners who maybe they're younger, they don't have a lot of money, and they're just now maybe getting engaged or they're combining their finances? Do you still recommend them to do a prenup prior to getting married, even though they may not have a lot to lose if they were to get divorced? Financially,
yes.
I guess.
And keep in mind, of course, that this is what I do every single day. And I'm biased, obviously, and I'm very much in favor of going into the marriage with an understanding as to what you want to do, regardless of how much you have. And the reason it's sometimes more important for couples who are maybe just starting out and don't have a lot of money is that maybe this couple, maybe you're an entrepreneur, and prenups don't just cover by any means what you're coming into the marriage with. They also cover assets that you acquire during your marriage. So one of the trickiest things in a divorce is how to value and distribute business interests. So if you have a millennial couple, one person has a startup, the other person has a different kind of business, and they may want and intend that if their marriage doesn't work out, that they each keep their own businesses and they don't have to worry about valuing their businesses. If they don't have a prenup saying that, that is not what is going to happen if they were to get a divorce. So certainly for people who are budding entrepreneurs or have hopes of being an entrepreneur, a prenup can be extremely important, even if they're coming in with very little money.
Okay, and one of the things I'm taking away is it's important to understand this, and the states, it varies state to state. So all the more reason to understand what your state law says. And part of this, a lot of people feel, I'm sure, that this is unromantic and this just takes away from the love that we have, and that this doesn't matter. But like a lot of things in the relationship, it's about communication and communicating around these financial issues, and so that everyone's on the same page. And in the end, it's really a romantic thing to do, that you can understand how really the law is going to dictate these things around a big part of your life, is the finances in your relationship. So I guess just another big, probably pretty basic question is just on the technical side of things. So in a state where, like New York, if you don't have a prenup, do they say, and you get a divorce, do they say everything just goes 50-50?
No. So in New York, we are an equitable distribution state and not an equal distribution state. So that means it is the percentage of split of marital property is something that people potentially fight about upon a divorce. So that being said, in longer marriages or marriages where there's children and both people contributed and both people worked, the default oftentimes with assets like houses or retirement assets or money in a bank is 50-50. But for business assets, or if you have a short-term marriage where there's not kids, the default is not necessarily 50-50. So another thing that a prenup can do, of course, is just to off the bat say, we're going to do it 50-50. We're not going to fight about a lot of these kind of smaller points, and you're eliminating some of the disputes so that if you have a divorce, you're deciding the terms and the rules when you're happy and in love, as opposed to, you know, when the marriage is broken down. And I just wanted to, a couple things that you said, Chase, that I just wanted to circle back to. The first being that it's unromantic to have a prenuptial agreement. I admit it's not the most romantic thing to have in the world, but it's a very important thing to at least talk about, whether you decide to get one or not. Having that conversation is very important. I view it in a lot of ways as an insurance policy, right? You know, a lot of us have life insurance. We have a will in place. And even though talking or thinking about our death is very uncomfortable. Now, I know we're all going to die, and a little less than 50% of us will get divorced. But if you are in that unlucky 50%, you know, you're going to be so much happier that you talked about these things and have an agreement in place that you made when you were in love than when you didn't. And the second point that I wanted to circle back to you was it really can be a win-win, because everybody comes into a relationship with some kind of anxiety. So maybe you have, in the case of the young couple, so maybe you have one person who's starting a business and is worried about what would happen to that business if there was a divorce, and would there have to be a valuation, and would the business partners have to be involved in this very personal issue. And then maybe the other side of that couple is thinking, you know, what would happen if I stayed home to raise children, and, you know, what would I get in terms of alimony and maintenance, and would I be able to support myself? So by talking about these issues, you can frame an agreement that, let's say, addresses the protection of the business and also addresses the other side's concern about being supported if he or she is a stay-at-home parent and hasn't worked in a number of years. So again, I circle back to that when you go in talking about these things, I think you can go into your marriage in a better place than if you just didn't talk about it and it comes up in various ways.
Exactly. And going back to that open communication, and this is all really enlightening to me, because now I'm understanding why you hear about nasty divorces and these court proceedings, because I can just picture there's no prenup, and then there's just going to be a lot of legal back and forth. And we don't want to think about these things, but it's going to save you a lot of headache. And you know, it's just the right thing to do. And I'm also picturing I think it's the opening scene of Wedding Crashers, where you got Owen Wilson and Vince Vaughn, and they're doing the divorce proceedings, and I'm sure, hopefully a lot of our listeners have seen it, but it's pretty classic. But yeah, it's got this kind of stigma, I think, the prenup around finances and relationships. It's like this big thing. And really, if you look at it being about open communication and honesty, and we can't predict the future. And we have this podcast to help people improve their relationships, but you know what? They do end sometimes. And even if and certainly you want to have this stuff in place, but even if it doesn't end, it's just good to have. And like you said, death, there can be, I'm sure, legal fighting if you're a business owner and you don't have a prenup, and maybe some relative stakes a claim to it. And I'm sure there's all sorts of messiness that can happen, reason to have these things in place.
Absolutely. And it's, in my view, it's just smart planning. And I'm seeing more and more young couples who don't have necessarily family money, or not necessarily coming in with a lot, but who are really interested in prenups, and it's coming from each side of the couple. So I think talking about these things and making it more common, and that it's not just something for the super wealthy, and it's not just something for people who are going to inherit a lot of assets, that it's really for the young person who has their act together and is just planning for every contingency in life. And I always tell my clients when we're done that I hope you put this away in a drawer and never have to look at it again. But it's there in case you need it. And in my mind, certainly it's money well spent to have that just in case. Because I'll tell you that a divorce is way more expensive than doing a prenuptial agreement.
I can imagine. So for Chase and I, for us, since we don't have a prenup, although Chase, that we did.
Apparently we don't. Now I know.
Can you walk us through how like a postnup would work? Like what we need to do to think about doing a postnup?
Sure, absolutely. What state are you guys in?
We're international right now. We live in Costa Rica, but I guess our home base would be Florida.
Okay. So you'd probably want to speak to a Florida attorney. Florida is pretty similar to New York. But if you wanted to have a postnup, I mean, the rules of every state differ. But in New York, if you wanted to have an agreement, the only legal requirements are that it's in writing and signed by both of the parties, and in the same form that's required to acknowledge a deed. So all that means is that you need to sign it in front of a notary, and the notary needs to sign a specific acknowledgement saying you are who you say you are. Beyond that, though, of course, to withstand scrutiny if there was a divorce. So a prenup could be overturned, or a postnup could be overturned if it's procured by fraud or duress, or if it's so one-sided. So you want to make sure you each have separate attorneys. You want to make sure that there is full and complete financial disclosure, and you want the agreement to be fair and equitable to each of you. It doesn't need to be completely equal. It doesn't need to be what would happen if you didn't have an agreement, because most of the time that defeats the purpose. But it needs to be something where you're each coming away with something from this agreement and each getting a benefit of it. So what I would recommend is, and how I like to handle the process, is for you each to have an attorney so that you can get educated. What's the law in Florida? What would happen if we didn't have an agreement? What could we do if we did have an agreement? What issues do we want to talk about in this agreement? So that you both understand separately by somebody who's looking out for your best interests as to where you are. And then after that, to come together and for the two of you to talk about what you'd want to do. So, I have no idea about your financial situation, but maybe one of you came into the marriage with more money, and then maybe the other one is going to make more money during the marriage. So you could decide, okay, we're each going to keep what we each have, or we're going to merge everything, or we're each going to keep what we came in and then merge everything that we make during the marriage. I mean, the possibilities are really up to you and what feels right for you. So I certainly suggest that after each side of the agreement, after each party is educated, that you really come together as a couple and talk about it, and to really set aside time in a quiet place where you have privacy, because in case those the questions bring up any difficult topics, so you're in a good place to talk about them, and to try your best with the help of attorneys to reach an agreement in principle about what you want to do before anyone puts any pen to paper or writes anything, so that it really feels like a collaboration between the two of you and a document that you created together. And then once you do that, then one side will draft the agreement, the other side will review it, and then you can sign it. And that's the basic sort of process.
Okay, we have some homework. We got some homework to do. So, Sarah, the podcast, we'll split it 50-50.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, good. All right.
I think, for us, I think it would be really easy because we got together when we were in college. We didn't really have anything, and we've both kind of equally contributed to our businesses now. So I think for us, it would be easy, but you never know, right? Until you get into the trenches and discuss everything.
Well, and another thing that you could talk about in this agreement is not just property distribution, but alimony. So, are you coming in thinking that you would want to not have support from the other, meaning, spousal support separate from child support? Or would you want to leave that issue open? Or do you want to have a formula where you determine whoever's making more has to pay the other person X% or something to that effect? I mean, that's another issue that you can talk about in addition to how do we want to handle assets that we acquire during our marriage and how do we want to split them? And do we want to have businesses be included? And if we do want to have business be included, then how are we going to value those businesses and how are we going to distribute those businesses? So there's usually, even in the most simplistic financial pictures, there's usually some issues to talk about. And sometimes these are things that maybe you haven't even thought about. The idea of, well, would I want to receive support from, Chase? Would I want to receive support from Sarah? So there's usually some things to think and talk about.
Yeah, these are a lot of important things to consider, and half jokingly, but I am curious. Do couples put pets in their prenups? Like who gets the pet?
Sometimes do. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's not, it's interesting because I've actually done a few prenups where we have specifically named the dogs in the agreement and who will get the dog. And I will tell you that I have had a couple divorces where that's come up and that's been an issue. And my clients have spent like many thousands of dollars fighting about dogs and cats, which I get. I'm a dog owner too, and they're family. So you can deal with that too.
Interesting. So this is all great information and a good starter for those listeners out there who are like me and don't even know whether or not they have a prenup. I'm pretty hands off in finances, if you can't tell, but this is really valuable stuff. And kind of along the same lines, definitely talking about finances in the relationship, I want to talk a little bit about how different people deal with money. And on a past show, we've talked about this as being your money personality. And put simply, some people are spenders and some are savers. And I'm sure those listening out there can quickly identify with one or the other. And this can become a big conflict in a relationship. So can you talk a little bit about that and how we can navigate just, I guess, being financially responsible as a couple?
Before we continue on, we're going to take a short break to tell you about our sponsors. We want to tell you about a new podcast that we've been listening to lately called Foreplay Radio Sex Therapy.
It's hosted by sex therapist and past guest on I Do Podcast, Lori Watson, and couples therapist, Dr. Adam Matthews.
They believe, and we do too, that sex can get hotter and better as your committed relationship grows.
They talk about things like low libido, relationship communication, and sexual techniques. It's another great relationship podcast to subscribe to, add to your playlist. And we hope you tune in and subscribe to Foreplay Radio Sex Therapy.
Today's episode is also brought to you by ModCloth. ModCloth is a fun, friendly online store that has styles as unique as you. ModCloth's mission is to empower women to be the best versions of themselves. And that's why their signature line of apparel is offered in full size range, from extra, extra small to 4X. I was just browsing their website, looking at all the adorable bathing suits. I literally live in a bathing suit here in Costa Rica. So every time I go back to the States, I have to stock up, and I have about 10 bathing suits in my cart right now, and I just cannot narrow it down. They have this one bikini called the Parasol Away With Me. How cute is that name? And it's high-waisted, and I wasn't quite sure about the fit because I'm tall, so I reached out to their team of mod stylists who hooked me up with a complimentary sizing and styling help, so I know the fit will be just right. And they can do that for you too. If you're on their website and you're not quite sure about the styling or the fit, you can reach out to their mod stylist and they can hook you up. Also, for you ladies out there who are planning your wedding, ModCloth also has a bridal boutique. So whether you're a bride or a bridesmaid, or you just have to go to a bunch of weddings this summer, ModCloth has it all. So to get 15% off your purchase of $100 or more, go to modcloth.com. That's ModCloth.com and enter the promo code IDO at checkout. This offer expires on August 4th, so you have to hurry up. Again, to get 15% off your purchase of $100 or more, go to modcloth.com and enter the promo code IDO at checkout.
Sure, happy to. It's important, no matter what style you are, whether you're a spender or a saver, I think that you talk about these things with your spouse or your partner, and also that you don't kind of turn a blind eye to the financial issues. You said, Chase, that you tend not to be as involved in the financial issues, and I would encourage you, I think it's fine to let somebody take the lead in a relationship, because often you have somebody who's just likes to do that stuff. I mean, in my relationship with my husband, I take the lead on terms of filing taxes and budgeting and keeping track of what we're spending. But I encourage him, and he says, maybe once every 6 months or once a year, we sit down and we have a review of what we do. So that if you're the one who's not the day-to-day person who's organizing the finances, that you still have knowledge and an understanding as to what you have. Because the most difficult divorces are the ones where people come in and they have no idea what they have. They have no idea what they made. And very well-educated, intelligent people, it's not at all a reflection on somebody's competence in life. It's just that some people don't handle the money stuff. And I think a lot of pain can be solved if they'd have more of an understanding during the marriage and throughout the relationship as to what they had and what they're saving and what they're spending. Because, it turns out sometimes that I've had divorces where one party was not involved, and it turns out that the other person really spent all the money and they had no idea. And that makes the pain from a divorce that much worse, to also find out your partner wants a divorce and he or she has been handling the finances, and he's been doing a not very good job at it, and you have no money. So my advice would be to just make sure to have those check-ins and to talk about it. And if you do have different spending styles, that maybe in those situations it makes sense to have maybe one joint account where you have the family's expenses that come out of, and vacations and dinners, and then maybe you each keep your own account of discretionary money that you agree X dollars will be set aside, so that if I want to spend all of that on whatever, I can do so without having my spouse second guess it, and same with the other side.
Would you recommend putting together some sort of financial contract post, kind of like a post-nump, but a little bit different, kind of managing a budget or allocating finances for a couple?
I wouldn't do that in a contract, because the whole idea of a contract is that if you then don't follow that contract, there's penalties. So in my prenups, for example, I almost never have provisions about, here's how we're going to spend money, or here's how we're going to, here's what percentage of income we're going to put into this account. Because like I said before, I want people to put the prenups in a drawer and not have to think about them. And if you have one that kind of micromanages how you're dealing with your money on a daily basis, then that's not a prenup you can ignore. And if you do ignore it, then that kind of prenup, then it can come to hurt you later. Because if you have one that you were supposed to do things on an annual basis, and then you get divorced 10 years later, what you're doing is you're opening yourself up to the other side saying, oh, now we need to see how we allocated our money for the last 10 years. And that actually makes your divorce more complicated as opposed to simplifying the divorce, which is one of the goals of a prenup, to have your divorce be easier and less painful and less expensive. So just in answer to your question, Sarah, I would not recommend that you have any contract, but certainly discussions, check-ins, understandings are all really, really good. And transparency. So even if, my husband does and I do our day-to-day, categorizing our spending and working on our budget, and we do that through mint.com, but he has all access to every single account. So he could go in on any note at any moment and see, how much we're spending, how much we're saving, what are in our accounts. So we have ultimate transparency, but he trusts me to do a good job. And I think most of the time he doesn't check, but he can.
Yeah. Forming a budget is really valuable. It's like the most basic kind of financial planning, but it's easy to kind of skip over or feel like you don't need to have it. And I know Sarah and I, it's been really valuable, one, just for being responsible financially, but two, it kind of eliminates any gray area because numbers don't lie. So we just look at the numbers and we go, man, we're spending way too much on going out to eat. And then we can talk about that as a couple where, the direction we want to go with that, but we're doing that based on raw data and good information, not just like kind of our feeling like, oh, you spend so much money on pedicures every month. And then there's elements of controlling and all sorts of things that can come into the play depending on your relationship. Whereas if you have a budget and it's just there, it's agreed upon by both of you. And then if there's a transgression or if financially you take a hit, you just go to the numbers and it's going to eliminate kind of a lot of silly back and forth and arguing that's not based on real data.
I agree with you. Data is power and numbers are power, and can really clarify a situation because it's so easy to conflate what you don't know and to not understand. And just, as you said, you're spending so much money on pedicures and maybe the reality is that she spends as much on pedicures as you spend on electronics from Amazon, for example. And without the data, you wouldn't know that. So I completely agree with you, Chase.
And more, I mean, how easy is it to do that? Everything's practically just kept for you on your phone. And I know there's programs and apps, that'll basically, you just plug everything in and there's really no excuse, with technology. It's not like, we're having to balance a checkbook or everything's, pretty much automated.
Yeah. And I get no money from Mint. I'm not a spokesperson for them, but I've used it for years and years for that exact reason, because once you put something in so that, Mint knows that if something comes up from the three main grocery stores I go to, it's categorized as groceries. And so I just need to go on and correct a few things here and there or put something new in. But basically, it does all the work for me. I just need to kind of check it every so often. But it's amazingly powerful. And that really helps when my husband and I sit down every 6 months or every year and go through, okay, how do we do this year? How much did we spend on this? What can we cut back on? Or what do we feel like we should spend more money on? I mean, is what we're spending meeting our values as a family?
So we love Mint and we use that as well. So we'll be sure to link to it on our show notes page for our listeners. Are there any other resources that you would recommend for our listeners who want to improve their finances in their relationship?
That's a good question, Sarah. I mean, personally, I just use Mint, but so I don't know that I'm the best person to answer that question, but nothing that jumps out off the top of my head.
That's okay. I just didn't know if there was a special thing or anything besides Mint, because it's a pretty great resource.
Yeah.
Well, Alyssa, this has been a very enlightening podcast for me particularly. I found out we don't have a prenup. And, but in all seriousness, very good information and important things, for our listeners to consider. Before we wrap up, are there any other major financial things that could be related to prenup or things we didn't talk about for our listeners to bring into their relationship?
When you're doing a prenup, it brings up other kind of basic documents that you should start to think about and have in place at the beginning of your marriage. So those include a will, a power of attorney, a healthcare proxy, a living will. You can think about whether or not you need life insurance, but getting your whole financial house in order and your planning house in order at the beginning of a marriage is something that I always recommend. And then updating it and reviewing what you have once a year, and then certainly upon the birth of any children.
Those are all great points. And I think that's a great way to end and a good takeaway, because again, there's like this negative stigma about prenups. And it's like, no, you're getting, like you said, your financial house in order. So think about prenups and think about all these things that you listed at the end there, as just getting your house in order. So it's really great advice, and we appreciate you coming on, Alyssa. So why don't we finish up by having you tell our listeners where they can find you online, and then we'll say goodbye.
Sure. So my website is rowerllc.com, and my contact info is there. And I practice in New York, so I can only help people who are living in New York with prenups or divorces. But if you just have a question or need a recommendation for an attorney in another state, I'm happy to give it. I know it can sometimes be overwhelming to figure out how do you find somebody good and trustworthy. And so I have other attorneys who I think are just great in other states, and I'm happy to give recommendations if I'm able to do so.
Well, that's great. I know a lot of our listeners do live in New York, so we encourage them to reach out to you. So again, thank you so much for coming on the show, and have a wonderful day.
Great. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
We hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. For more information and the links from the interview today, you can head on over to our website at idopodcast.com, click on the podcast tab, and it will be the first episode there. And while you're on our website, if you are interested in learning more information about our upcoming Hood River Couples Retreat, then click on the retreat tab and you'll be able to find all the information on the retreat. It's going to be at the end of July this summer, and we look forward to it with you guys. It's going to be an awesome couple days in Hood River. It's amazing there, so we hope you join us. And if you are on our website and you're looking for some resources or some tools for your relationship, we really encourage you to check out our 14-day Happy Couple Challenge. It's a free challenge where we send you a daily email for 14 days. And in each email is a doable challenge for that day to do within your relationship. And it's going to help you become stronger, more connected, more intimate, and we know that you're going to enjoy it. We've had some great feedback from all you guys who have done it, and we're so happy that it has helped you in your relationship. So again, all that information is on our website at idopodcast.com. Head on over there, and thanks so much for listening. Have a great day.